Okay, Boomer Juice is back. Jesus, I don't know if anybody's in this thing, and I just don't know how to determine that because the participants thing and it never tells me, and so I believe I'm talking to nobody, and then I get off the thing and everybody's like, "How come you turn it off? I was listening." Okay, how do I know that? Where are you? Speak on up. Come on, everybody. Anybody that gets on in here, just introduce yourself in chat so I know I'm talking to somebody. I do much better talking back and forth. I I mean I can lecture, but I don't. I'm not a big fan of it, and I just so uh, I much rather converse than stand on a pulpit. So um, just I'm just gonna I'm on the uh, uh, so hold bear with me if you're on and you're typing on Yahoo or Yahoo, Jesus, old man, um, YouTube. I'm just I'm just making some things here uh, for for Twitter. So okay, I just whatever. I'll leave it open, but I don't know, if people are here or listening or not. So anyway, so after 15 minutes of staring at zero, I was just like, well, I guess everybody's watching Bill on Dungeon Delver or whatever. So, which is fine. I mean, oh, there we go. What's up, Raven? I just I still catch myself doing this thing where I'm looking at, like right now, it tells me that nobody's connected. I don't see you listed as connected. So I assumed I was talking to nobody, and I thought, well, hell, I'm going to give up. I was talking for 16 minutes with and thinking nobody was in the place, and then I get a bunch of tweets from people after I turn it off, going, "Hey, why'd you turn it off? I was listening." This machine is telling me, yeah, the thing tells me nobody's there, and then I pull the rug out from under people. Yeah. So, and I thought, well, hell, I'm talking to nobody. I guess I'll shut her down. And then I find out, indeed, people were talking to me. So I'm just going to leave it open tonight. I'm about to go homeless. I'm being ejected from this apartment and in a couple of days, and I don't have anywhere to go. So I'm just leaving this stream up just to talk to people and keep in touch and try to do something to discuss things because I just haven't, I've seen an old war game site called One Page Rules. I believe it was from Jim Wallman, if I remember right. Could be wrong, but I've seen. Um, I thought that was what he called his blog, but yeah, I think it was Jim. Could be wrong, but that's the One Page Rules that I'm familiar with. And the wargaming stuff that, well, here's what I've always found. Yeah, yeah. There's one called Free Wargame Rules .uk or something like. It's a British site. They've got a bunch of things. A lot of the links are starting to die off because they're so old, but there's still some pretty good stuff on there. But um, they've got a lot of that kind of thing. They're all right. Some of them are fun to play. Yeah, yeah. There's a lot. There's always been alternatives, but most people don't. I don't know why they never really get well known. But uh, I played some one page things, but I started out playing Cold War Modern and World War II historical, and one page really isn't enough. Everybody goes, oh, I want simple, and then they start playing simple, and they realize you got to put a little bit more into it to make it enjoyable. But with sci-fi, where we want to go is where we want to go, you know. But I've seen one page alternative rules to 40K. In fact, there's a couple on that site I was talking about too. Yeah. Yep. Cheap stuff. But um, there's another one called 2 Hour War Games. They make some pretty good ones. I don't know if they make sci-fi or not. Um, yeah. Right. Yep. I've seen stuff like that. There was stuff like that in the past. But yeah, it's a good way to start. Good way. You know, some people just stick with that. They don't want to, you know, spend a lot of money, and they don't uh, want complication and things like that. So those are solid, legit thing to do. Um, I quit with 40K because it cost too darn much, and the rules started to get too thick. Second edition was where I leveled out, and even there, I had people pulling, you know, rules out of White Dwarf. I didn't have money nor inclination to subscribe to White Dwarf. I just had the rule books, and then I'd go to the table, and people have rules from White Dwarf, and go, you know, they'd want to play these things I'd never heard of, and it got a little annoying and expensive. So I pulled the plug. I love Space Hulk. I'll play that all day long, but that 40K is great, but new things. So, but I used to use one page rules, you know, to introduce people, and I'd pull out old Timmy Toys toy soldiers, or Mark's toy soldiers. They would make little sci-fi, generic sci-fi stuff and things like that. We'd play little games. Yeah, yeah. I went to one of their stores in Illinois, and they, you know, where they give you the spiel and the thing. And boy, I said, okay, so set me up. Where do I start? And I'd already bought second edition. I was interested in seeing how Games Workshop did it, because I was thinking of starting my own retail shop, you know. And they give you the sales pitch, and then they stack you up with an armful of shit, $120, right, just to open up the gate. Wow, no thanks. And I let myself get talked into 40K to start with, because all these people kept telling me that micro armor was dead. They weren't all that wrong about micro armor, but I kind of just figured, they're like, well, if you want a game, this is the only game in town these days. So I went and bought it, and then I didn't like anything about it. I love the lore, I love the miniatures. They're really neat, and I didn't really even mind the game so much. But that was it. The the table atmosphere sucked. A lot of the gamers were highly competitive and obnoxious, and the gaming store uh, was kind of, that I played at. The guy was kind of pushy about, you know, having things all regulation and all that. He was like, just too many rules, too much of that shit. So I gave up, you know. And then I went, and my biggest education on Games Workshop and gaming store retail in general is, I went looking for a job in the Midwest, south of where I was. I started in Chicago and went looking. Well, it was south of Chicago, really, but the Chicago area. Then I went down to St. Louis, and then I went over to Fort Wayne, and briefly into Ohio. And I hit all these stores looking for a place to. I was willing to move to work at a game store, and I really kind of wanted to break into 40K or to Games Workshop for a while. Wow, man! I went to a retailer, a regional retailers meeting in Downers Grove, Illinois, where people from all over Indiana, Ohio, Missouri, Iowa, Wisconsin, not a lot, but several of them showed up at this regional meeting. Holy shit, were there? I have red faced, psycho eyed, spittled. These retailers were just infuriated. This was years ago. So then I went around and I talked to some of them at the meeting, and then I went and hit all these different game shops all around St. Louis and places like that, and talked to them about what was going on. and how bad Game Workshop was, and how horrible the idea of having a retail game store really is. Seems like a great idea until you read the fine print. No way. So it was quite an education. But uh, I played wargaming when it was 1/285th metal miniatures, and micro armor was the big thing back in the early '80s and stuff like that. And it wasn't cheap, but those companies weren't out to cut your throat, or to beat out their retailers. They were decent people working with retailers, and it was a different world than the '90s, where it just became a bunch of cutthroat shit. Boy, some of the stuff they said, those Games Workshop people, they were arrogant and rude. We asked them about some of the lawsuits and about the fact. Oh, okay, well, they're finally, people are, yeah, people are finally, and they're gonna die off. But they were climbing the ladder, and they were kind of king of the world at the time, and they were really dicks about it. They were really really cruel to their retailers. Then they would open up retail shops right down the road from the retailers they were selling their product to, and then undercut those retailers. I mean, they were just vicious. And uh, if you want to carry their product, they would determine how you would display it, what display shelves you would use. You would buy those display shelves at your cost. They wanted to tell you everything. And then people started asking them about some of the IP violations, because some of the things that they were making were borderline IP violations, and they just put up the finger and said, "Try to sue us." Ridley Scott from that made Aliens tried to sue him, and he lost. He tried to sue him for gene stealers. Being a copy of the alien, didn't work. But yeah, they were British. The two guys at the Downers Grove thing they were right from England, and oh wow, they were like the kind of people that you would expect to see in a Revolutionary War movie. The really pompous asshole British officer. Just dick all the way around. And but I learned. I says, this is not the way I want to go. It seemed like a great idea. You go to these game shops as a kid, and you hang out and you have fun. You go, oh, wow, why would I really want to do a real job when I could, run a game store? Ooh, you don't want to do it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember reading about the aliens stuff, and they just go ahead, give it a try, sue us, see what happens. So they were assholes. So I got away from that, and I learned quick. Don't get involved in that side of the industry. So, but I did see, and that's how I learned about Flames of War. And I thought, oh god, these guys were playing. The one thing I always wanted to do, and I couldn't get enough people to do it as a business, is I wanted to have a wargaming service. And these guys were doing similar. They weren't doing it as a service, but when I went into the Downers Grove place, they had all this Games Workshop 40K stuff. But then in the back, they had 30 seconds, 1/32nd scale World War II stuff. Pretty big, like a half track was like this big and stuff. And they had a bunch of it, and they were playing with it out in the parking lot. And I used to do that with the same kind of 1/32nd stuff, but me and a buddy, we'd go down to the beach near Lake Michigan and do it, and play with it. God, I love doing that stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but we wanted to do that. What we wanted to do is we wanted to have rentals where somebody would pay to rent the army, and then we would play the enemy. And like you and a buddy or a group of buddies, you could all be on one team, and then you could fight against us, so that you wouldn't have to fight your friends, and could use these big models outdoors to fight, play these big war games and stuff. But nobody really wanted to do that. It seemed like a great business idea because it was something that we wanted to do, but there wasn't anybody else that wanted to pay for that. So it never went anywhere. But we had fun playing with them. But I always thought I could do what I wanted to do before now I'm going to end up I'll be lucky if I'm not walking the streets in a week. But what I wanted to do was have a service where I would online, I would provide a wargaming service where people would play double blind. You know, you wouldn't know what was going on with the enemy other than what your troops would be able to see on the battlefield, and all the combat and everything would be taken care of by me and a computer, and all you would get was reports from your troops about what's going on, and you would, you know, send your orders to me, and then I would make the adjustments on the board or the table or whatever, and you would all the players would connect once a week or once a month or whatever decided to do, and we'd have a game session, and the rest of the time you would just get updates and make decisions uh, about what to do for that game time. So it wasn't happening without your knowledge. You were just getting the orders done before game time. So when it was game time, all you had to do was watch the action unfold and then make decisions based on what you've seen for the next time. And I was going to charge a service for that. That was my idea. But I don't have a roof over my head in 3 days, so much for that. I probably telling my business person. I had an associate that was helping me, and they're like, "Don't tell people; they'll just go and do it while you're out and about." Well, they probably will, but that was my idea. I can still do it to some degree with a phone as long as I can maintain my phone service. Um, but it'd be helpful if you could do it from inside a building. So we'll see. Um, really sucks, man. It really sucks. But I got to be out by the 12th, so that's why I just was open up this chat to chat, and then I saw Dungeon Delver Bill was on, and I thought, well, shit, everybody's going to just go and listen to him. So, but I'll leave it open because I just want to talk to people for the last. I don't know. This might be the last night I get a chance to do it. I might not be able to do it for the rest of the time while I'm moving out and stuff. So, yeah, I've been flirting with disaster because of the lack of money for about a year or more, and it finally just I couldn't keep my head above water. So I was hoping to make something out of this idea with what I was doing, and I've got a bunch of old D&D material that nobody's seen that I wanted to sell, but I just couldn't get a card. I mean, I couldn't. I was going to put it out for auction and stuff like that. I just couldn't do it in time. Couldn't beat the buzzer. So now I got to. My biggest concern now is getting all my game material out that's worth something as fast as possible, because I know this company that I rent from, and they'll just, as soon as I'm out the door, they'll throw it away. And can you sue them about that? Yeah, you can sue them if you've got the money, but it won't change the fact that they had already thrown away irreplaceable stuff. I got stuff from TSR that nobody's ever seen. They were products that were prototyped that never made it to market. And I've got examples of them and artwork and stuff like that. And I've got to save it because I could never get it appraised. It can't be insured. I don't have any insurance for it. So could I sue them, for not following the 30 days they're supposed to give me to get my stuff out? Yeah, but it would still be gone. And I know they're going to put it in the garbage if I don't get it out. So I'm spending my day busting my ass trying to find places to squirrel this stuff away. And hopefully, wherever I end up at temporarily, I can use an internet connection and maybe sell this stuff. And that might be able to put some money in my pocket to go start over. So that's where I'm at. So it's not looking good. It's a real bitch. So I just, I was just starting to get people to come and follow me. I was just starting to get people to come and see me on stream and all this stuff. I was about ready to try to sell my service. It looked like there were some people that might be interested, and well, so, but yeah, the wargaming stuff, that was what I was going to talk about. I put it out earlier today. I put out a 15-minute thing on that. You know, the idea of the service with all this bro SR stuff that's going on and all the bickering. I was just trying to talk about the the concepts behind the bro SR and not about those guys and the way they talk or any of that stuff because people just keep getting pissed off. I see why, you know. So, but the ideas are good, but keep telling people that they're playing wrong and you're not going to get anywhere, you know. It's just going to piss people off. But yeah, doing that is a lot of fun. That one for one time, which isn't really the right way to put it. I always call it simultaneity, but it's great. It's great in wargaming too. But you really need to have that ref that can do it in order to make it feasible. And one for one time makes it sound like you're playing every minute of your life, and it's not a great label. That's not really the way it was supposed to be done. And I don't believe that. Now, I didn't know Gary. I've met Gary and all that, but I know people that played with Gary. I know people that played like Gary. I was one that played like Gary before D&D. I started with war games before D&D, and I know how that one for one time is supposed to work in reality, and it's good. But you know, like I was saying on the other stream, I just look at it this way: there was foods that I didn't like because they didn't look edible or they didn't sound like something I wanted to eat. And then somebody conned me into trying them. And in some cases, like sushi, I ended up loving it. And that's all I say to people. I said, give it a try. You know, if you don't like it, you know, spit it out and go back to the PB&J or whatever your favorite meal is. Trying to get people to try OD&D. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not really. You know, so a lot just like wargaming community. I got people where instead of playing, they kept talking about how they had no time, but then they'd go on social media and start discussing, and then they'd start talking like they were real connoisseurs, you know, like wine snobs, you know, and sniffing the glass or whatever the hell those people do, you know, and um, they started to make a lot of this stuff sound a lot more complicated and than it needed to be. And being a DM, I think, is one of those things. It's not that big of a rocket science. It's not that big of a skill. Is there people that can and can't do it? Probably, but you know, um, I don't think it's quite to the level of being, you know, a skilled artiste, in my opinion. But you know, yeah, AD&D, I loved it. I loved the hardcover books. I loved paging through them. They made me salivate. I love games with a lot of options. I like big games. I like what people call crunchy games. You know, a lot of people are the opposite, but man, I could, between the artwork and the statements and uh, the advice that was given and just the rules and the tables. Wow, you can do this and you can do that. And I was great. But when it was when it was time to go, hey man, you want to try this game with me? Well, okay, well, yeah. Here, take a look at this, and you you hand them these volume. You know, they just be like, oh, gee, you know, I just got out of school. I don't want it. You know, and then they didn't want to play it because it just seemed like a collegiate course in math. You know, and then you go, okay. And I'd pull out Beck Me or something like that, and they'd be like, "Yeah, that's more like it," and they'd want to play. So OD&D um, was a lot more popular with a lot more people around me because it didn't seem like it was going to split your head open having to think about it. Yeah, I mean, comparatively, they're really, you know, they're hard. I even had some people balk at Beck Me, and I thought, well, bro, come on, it's not that bad. Um, but usually Beck Me was the like if they didn't, they're like, well, I heard about AD&D, but my mom said it was bad to do or whatever. That's when you handed them Beck Me, you know, because it didn't have a lot of that hardcore occultic looking stuff in the artwork at first, you know that. So it was kind of like the one to and then when they got more comfortable or we got away from the parents, then you'd pull out OD&D or something like that. But um, but yeah, all that stuff, second edition and all that, people would look at that and they go, man, I don't want to learn all that shit. I just want to play. So I agree. Um, but beautiful, I'd never give those hardcovers up. I just look at them. That Dungeon Master with swinging open the door, all that stuff was just excellent. But it's same with it. We had a war game that was like that called Advanced Squad Leader, and I'd paw at it and I'd stare at it and be like, "Hey man, look at this. Let's play this." And they go, "Fuck that. That's like AD&D, and module after module and book after book to read before he can play." And everybody go and walk over to a game called Panzer Blitz that had 14 pages. get through it in one night and play. Um, yeah, it's kind of got that, you're handing off that transition without going full tilt crazy on the advanced. Yeah, yeah. And the first one I saw was the BX. Was it? It was the very first thing I saw was Rogues Gallery, and then I went from there. When I went down to my uncle's basement to first learn about when I first learned about D&D, I'd heard the name, but I'd never seen anything. And he had it under a blanket or something. And when I peeled it up, the first thing I saw was Rogues Gallery. That was the first book ever. I just started looking through it. I got to learn more about this. Where's the manual, And then I think he brought me a BX box, the box set. That was like one of my first presents from him, was that, which was neat. And but yeah, um, and then I got Beckme, and that was the one that, like I said, you pull that out. That was the teaser, the lure. It was a pretty good game. I used to have fun with that. We had a thing going where we played with the war machine, and we all had a little castle, and we were, fighting each other for domination of some fictitious land, some map we got out of some book somewhere. Had fun doing that, Um, yeah, yeah, and then they Chainmail was actually its own game, and then they had that Swords and Spells, which was kind of the Chainmail made for the D&D. But when you really break it all down, all they did is they took the old war game called Kriegspiel, and instead of having, Napoleonic soldiers with rifles being toted and cannons, they turned it into orcs and elves and ents and tried to play some, replay some of the battles from the Tolkien, from the Lord of the Rings. And they played that, and then they said, well, let's try to push it a little further. And they went to skirmish instead of huge armies. They would just have, a handful of guys. And then they said, let's take them indoors. And then they moved it into the dungeon. It was just skirmish wargaming inside of an old dungeon. So it really is just a war game converted. And so that's why I was going to do the stream here about wargaming and all that. But everybody that's got a bigger account is preempting me. That's fine. I should have known better. I'll leave it open. Eventually, other people will come in too. Maybe just talk tonight and say hello, goodbye, or whatever. But yeah, I was going to talk about the wargaming aspect more, and chainmail, and for all these people that are trying to, attack one for one, go to Chainmail Second Edition, and I think it's like, 7 pages in or whatever. There's a thing called turn sequence. When you read the turn sequence, right below that, there's called simultaneous turn sequence. That's one for one. That's all it is. As simple as that. And the idea, instead of two armies don't take turns shooting each other or moving, they're just like wrestling or boxing. There's two combatants moving around trying to get an edge on one another and trading shots in real time. And a simultaneous movement is an attempt to try to uh, simulate that in a system where you've got two or more people that are, the computer. There's no computer to make everything move at the same time. So you use that one for one time, which is a bad phrase to use to describe what they're doing, but it's an intent to do that. So I told people, I made a video last night. Just read that simultaneous movement in chainmail. You don't have to buy chainmail. You can get chainmail anywhere. The PDF is floating around everywhere, and you can. In fact, I'll give you the link if you want it, and you can read it right there. And that just gives you an insight of what they're looking at as far as one for one time. But chainmail and any of those war games are better played with a referee. Two or more combatants per side, if you can. Teams are better than individuals, and having a ref that can arbitrate line of sight, so that if somebody's hiding behind a tree or a building and your troops wouldn't be able to see them, that can be simulated by the referee. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not. I don't know if that's got something to do with my. Oh, good. Uh, if that's got to do with my connection speed, or a glitch on their end, or what. But I don't have anybody. What do you call it? Oh, okay. The homes with the. Yeah, that's what I was trying to explain with some of this rules as written versus open play thing or whatever like that. And people keep quoting the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide on page 236. Yeah, yeah. Well, all these games, AD&D or D&D or TSR is TSR started out making war games before D&D, obviously. A lot of them. They made more than just chainmail. And all these old war game companies, a lot of them were kind of fly by night. And they didn't have very good printers. They didn't have very good editors. So you'd always get what they called addendum or appendixes or something like that. Sometimes by mail. It was like getting a patch for a program, before there was programs, and they'd send it in some periodical, or they'd sell you a second edition or something like that, or they would make adjustments and then put the pamphlet in later runs of the same copy. But there was always updates, and that's a lot of what that was fixing problems that were, editorial problems, or somebody just wrote something poorly and it contradicted another rule, so they made adjustments and all that. All these things, way into the late 80s and early 90s, you can go through most war gaming manuals of all sorts, made by all sorts of company, and in the back there'll be an appendix or addendum, where it says part 36.5, this rule should read this way and not that way. That kind of shit was everywhere. It was a real problem for a while. And this quote that everybody's arguing over about whether its rules are written or Gary meant to just, the rules were a guideline. All he was talking about was that because a lot of these rules were written in ways that had an open interpretation or just were poorly worded, was that instead of having an argument or debate about that issue at the table that would drag game out, just make a ruling, just like football. The referee makes the call. Is the call right all the time? No. Or an umpire. Oh, strike, bullshit. That was way out of the zone, and everybody on TV could say so, but he still made the call. That doesn't mean that rule is always going to be that the strike zone 6 inches wider now. It's just you make the call at the time to keep the game rolling. Not take the game rules and throw them over your shoulder and say, forget it, I'll just make it up as I go along. Yeah, I know. I've been for the damn cord. I try everything. In fact, the only way I've been able to, it just doesn't want to stop rolling up. So actually, what I've done is I've weighted it down in the past so it didn't look so bad. But yeah, that's all that was. Is and we used to call those rules conventions. And what you would do is with Wargame, that's as good as I can get it. Look at that. I need heavier keys. But in wargaming, what we would do is we'd have the rules convention prior to play. If there was a known hole in the rules or something that didn't make sense, we'd before play, we'd go, hey, what do you think about this? How do you think this should work? And we'd hammer out some sort of agreement that everybody felt was legit, and then we'd play from that way out. That was it. Mhm. Yeah, and that's all Gary. Like I say, I didn't know Gary well, but I knew enough about those, and I knew other people. I know Mike Carr and all those guys. I talk, so I know some. I knew Greenwood and a lot of them, Chadwick and all these guys, and I know what he was talking about. He was very verbose. So what do they call it? High Gygaxian or whatever. It was a very lengthy and verbose way of saying keep the game rolling and don't let players steamroll you or bamboozle you uh, with arguing over a rule. Just make the ruling and keep on going. That's all he was saying with that. So you kind of got the same thing with this issue that we had in wargaming way back when wargaming was born in the 1800s, modern wargaming that is. And there was this strict versus um, free, and free wasn't meaning that uh, you didn't have rules. That's been this erroneous interpretation by a lot of people about free Kriegspiel, meaning it's just open, just roll, just make it up. No, it was simply this, that sometimes a situation will come up that isn't covered in the rules. A lot of war game and other rules will say there's no possible way we can cover every individual situation, and so you have to make up, some ruling if something odd comes up. And in the original Kriegspiel, there was just like any other rule book that you would see today. There was an explanation, an opening, a turn sequence, the movement rates for the troops, how many troops were in each unit, how far the rifles could shoot, all of that shit, all the tables and everything. And if it wasn't in the tables or it wasn't in the book, then there was no way to make a ruling. Where all Verdi, who came up with free Kriegspiel, was saying was wing it. If it isn't in the book, come up with something so you can keep the exercise going. That's it. And on Twitter, it's become this war of zealotry that I just kind of look and I go, there's a lot of people out there talking about the way people played in the 80s, and I don't think they're old enough to remember. And even some guys who were there are saying, well, nobody played like that in the 80s. Oh, really? Because there was about 280 million people in this country, if I recollect, in the early 80s, and there's no way you knew them all. Didn't matter how many conventions you went to or anything like that. If you say definitively that everybody was playing the way you were playing in 1982, you're full of shit. Pardon my French, but you are. You don't know. We played just like the BROSR guys are talking about. Did everybody? No. Not even in Milwaukee, just the small little town. And, so. But those guys did, like I said, I knew people that played with Gary. I spent most of my time in America has been in Wisconsin. And I know Lake Geneva. I know Lake Geneva guys. I know guys that played out there, So, and I've heard other people say that too. Well, I knew this guy that played with Gary, and he said nobody ever did it that way. Well, I know these guys that played with Gary, and that's exactly the way they did it. So I don't know what to say. So that becomes a he said, she said. You could just as easily look at me and say, well, this guy's just talking out of his ass. He doesn't know any of those guys. Fair enough. It was 45 years ago. I don't have proof of that, but whatever. So it's all the same, just go whatever direction you want to go. But my intent on talking tonight was to talk about specifically about how I wanted to do it, how I wanted to run mass combat and things like that for this service, and how I hope I can be able to do it once I get pulled out of this financial nosedive I'm in as far as um, my lodging situation. So, and then I wanted to talk to people. I wanted to see if anybody had anything to say about it, or any questions about it, or anything like that. So, fire away if you do. Oh, now they're both gone. Looks like both. See, this is the thing. Now I don't know if you're still here. I saw two people speak to me, and that's great. And now, and they were both under the participants list, and now they're both gone. Really weird. Okay, thanks. So I just, and it's like, and now now it says you're back, but for a while it said you were gone, and I just go, am I talking to anybody or not? Um, oh yeah, well, the war meeting some of these guys. I tell you about Chadwick. I went to Frank Chadwick was a guy that wrote for GDW, and he made Civil War games. He made modern games. I don't know how. I don't remember how if he uh, was he involved in Twilight 2000. I don't know. I don't remember. I just dropped my cherry coke, but he might have been involved in that to some degree. Let's check that out real quick. But yeah, he was big in GDW, and I got an argument with that fella, Frank. Twilight 2000. I think he was involved in that to some degree. Yeah, he wrote for that too. So, and he wrote a game called Combine. Well, it was Command Decision first, and then they made, and that was World War II. It was World War II wargaming for HO scale models, and then he made it for a add-on or a second product, sequel product called Combined Arms, and that was for World War III, or the potential World War III. And these were done in the 80s. And he also made Johnny Reb, which was a Civil War version. And then he was involved with Twilight 2000. So I talked to him one time. I go up and I said I didn't like the way he did armor penetration for the wargaming. And I went up to him and I brought it up to him. Jesus, did that guy snap on me? He's a little bit older than me too, and he, I hear that one more time, and he started yelling at me. And I says, I never met you before. I don't know how many people you ask you this question. I came up here because you're selling your wares, and I bought it, and I had a question about it. And he just kept on bitching and bitching and bitching, and to the point where his the guy working the booth with him had to kind of tell him to shut up. This guy's here to spend money on your product. Calm down. And I don't know if Frank's a bad guy. I've seen him a couple other places, and he was never friendly to me, but that's okay. But I listened to him do some talks, and this is a hard thing to do. When people have made a name for themselves making these games, and then you go at you say, what, some of their things are wrong, most people won't believe you, or most people think you're talking out your ass. But the thing is that credentials and expertise, it's all a matter, sometimes it's relative. And I don't agree with a lot of Frank's ideas. And Frank's put out some videos expounding in the history of the Second World War and his ideas, and they're not that great, and I don't agree with them at all. So it's interesting, but when you've never printed anything, and I think I'm 5 years younger than Frank, and you're coming at him as almost a kid, trying to tell him he's wrong, and he's the. It's difficult to do. I did a whole blog post about that. You know, uh, the mythos of credence or credibility based on credentials. You know, so. Um, but I remember how pissed he got. I always tell that story. And then uh, right after this happened, then I went to I went to Jim Dunnigan. And if you don't know that name, he's a huge name in wargaming. And I didn't know he was going to be there at the Gen Con when I was there. And they go, yeah, Dunnigan's over there signing stuff, and I didn't have anything of his for him to sign. I had all I had in my hand was Frank Chadwick's rules because I was going to talk to Frank. So I ran, and he goes, "Well, he's only going to be there for an hour, so go get in line." So I ran in there and got in line with Frank Chadwick's book, and then I looked like a schmuck because I handed Dunnigan somebody else's product to sign. He wouldn't sign it. I don't blame him. But that was a couple of things that happened at the con. But playing with these guys were fun, and you learn a lot. But playing war games with them, you know, you really get an insight as to what D&D started as being. And I just, so I'm just this guy that kind of broke in about 6 months ago. I didn't think anybody was talking about RPGs anymore. And all of a sudden, it just started showing up on my threads and stuff. But I've been around this stuff for a long time, and I'm old enough to know these guys. I would go to these conventions, and I would talk to them face to face. All sorts of people, Joy Khan, and like I said, Mike Carr, and all these guys. And I mean, they're smart, and so I'm not trying to put myself over all of them, but some of them, Don Greenwood, there's a nice guy. Don was great, and he was right about most things, but sometimes not always, and it's hard to discuss that when you don't have any name recognition. Nobody goes, who the hell is this old guy? But I worked with, I got to rub butts with them, and even some more. Yeah, yeah, and if you just because you made a great set of rules when it comes to wargaming and technical stuff and military stuff, you may have made a popular war game that a lot of people enjoy, and that's a great success. And there's nothing wrong with that, and good for you. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's technically accurate, or that your outlook on some of the real world equivalents is correct. Sometimes it's not. So, and in fact, the opposite sometimes is true, especially with wargaming, because highly technical, highly detailed wargaming rules tended to start turning people off as the 80s progressed. It was everybody wanted to get as realistic and as detailed as possible in the late 70s and early 80s. By the mid 80s, people were starting to go, oh, shit's starting to get a little too complicated. So people like H.N. Voss, who was a brilliant man and a very experienced scholar, and I believe he was a veteran as well, never got much in the way of press. In fact, most people belittle his system, although it was used extensively by the U.S. Army, because it was quick, it was easy, it was accurate, but it seemed complicated and unfun. And CNC that printed it didn't have the money for a bunch of fancy glossy color photos and such. So nobody ever, it didn't make a lot of money. But he knew more than Frank. Yeah, yeah, and I try to sometimes challenge him, but then I get well, who the hell are you? Nobody's ever heard of you. Have you printed anything? And like Victor said, he says, if you who you can't gain any ground. How did he put it? I'm paraphrasing heavily, but basically, you don't make a name for yourself until you've published something, and then you start, talking to people, and they go, "Oh yeah, you made that thing," and then they start giving you some credibility. But unpublished, if you've never made anything or made a product, nobody has any reason to give you the time of day, and that's why selling my service didn't work out very well. But in reality, what I did in the Army after the Gulf War had a lot, was very close to that kind of stuff that I'm trying to sell as a service. And I'm well versed in it. And in the past, I've done it with people as a service briefly, uh, and it worked out okay. It was brief because it worked out okay inside a garage of a married man. And wifey said, "You're going to tear that shit down because I'm buying another minivan for the fam." So, which we had to do, but yeah, we had this service going in a garage. We built this wooden contraption inside this 2-car garage, and we had people coming in through the side door of the garage, and they'd pay money at like a little gatehouse, and then they'd take up their position and play the war game. And we built this pedestal uh, and this enclosure that we stood in, and we would run the war game from inside this little enclosure, and they would stand at a table outside of it in the garage. And we had a few people pay for that. And it was kind of half-ass, but it was kind of fun. But I wanted to do that online. That was my idea. So, and I might still try to do it through my phone, provided I got some decent internet. Um, so we'll see. Yeah, it was great, and it's a it's a great way to play it. Um, so, and we did it. I saw it today. I saw people saying, "Ah, this has never been done." Well, I remember living campaigns all through the '80s. They were promoted in uh, Gamma. They were promoted in the RPGA, the Role Playing Gamers Association periodicals, all the time, all through the '80s. And Origins had them, um, and Gen Con had them. And they would play at the convention, and then they would play year round via the magazine. This is before, they had cell phones, but cell phones were bag phones that you had to pay $4,000 for and carry around in your car's, trunk. So most of this was done by writing into a company or writing into the magazine um, publisher, and they would put the comments and the orders that you had in this homemade RPGA association periodical, and they would play living campaigns. Um, oh yeah, it was a completely different time. But all these people saying, "Oh no, you never," that brosaur stuff didn't happen. Oh yeah, it did. Oh yeah, it did, and in big numbers. This wasn't one or two people doing this, or a party of six. This was 50, 60 people from around the country doing it via written note through the United States postal system, and they could do it. So you could do this. It would not be difficult at all, to do something like that today with somebody who was well organized and with a group of people who were really interested in doing it and had the motivation to do it. And all the people, everybody's got, you know, responsibilities in life, and time is precious. I get that. And I wouldn't, but all I say to people is just look at all the posts you put on Twitter or on Discord or on Facebook, whatever, and during a week, and then take that time per post per day and total it up for a week, and then tell me that you couldn't spend that same amount of time writing a couple of orders for a party or for a war game unit to play a game that was going on like every week. You couldn't write two. It would literally be the equivalent of two Twitter posts. Will be all you need to do. You have plenty of time to do it, and it'd be great. It'd be a lot of fun. I've been trying to get people, like I said, been trying to get people to do that for 3 years on Twitter, but I haven't been able to burn through the algorithm, and I haven't been able been articulate enough to sell it. And even when people express their interest, then usually what happens is the replies get ghosted or turned off by Twitter, and you lose contact with the people or whatever the hell. But yeah, they were fun as hell. We used to do them in my house. We had all sorts of different ways we did that. Bill Dungeon Delver was talking about the board game named Dungeon that was written in the early to mid '70s. I used that to do a mini game with BECME. I just I used the board. I used original TSR miniatures, and I just kind of did a BECME dungeon crawl using that board as the dungeon. I made up my own cards. I did it random based on the levels. If you've never seen Dungeon is just this like Monopoly sized board, maybe a little bigger, and it's a dungeon, and each room in there's a section for each level. It goes from like 1 to 6 or something like that, and each level that's higher, it's a different color, and the monsters are a different level. The equivalent level of the color or whatever. But there was only a handful of monsters in the original game. I went into BECME and I wrote up a bunch of more monsters, and I put all the stuff on 3x5 cards, and then marked them and all that. And then you could only play like 2 or 3 different types of characters, and they weren't like RPG characters. They were. I think you could play an elf and a hero and a wizard, but the wizard could only fire fireballs or lightning bolts. But I got rid of that. I just said a full party, a dungeon crawl party. And I did it with some people once, and I did it by myself as a solo one time using the cards. And I just would draw it randomly. I would shuffle them, and I'd randomly draw a monster, and I'd fight it out just for something to do. Stuff like that. So there's another thing I wanted to talk to people about tonight. With wargaming and the big games that people say they can't be played, check out Mega Games. There's this outfit called Mega Games. They're they run large scale war games all throughout the year. 50 plus people, starting at 50. Got to be at least 50, and they do it in big halls, like they rent out a conference hall in a hotel, and they play these games, and they run them for people as a service. It's a club, and they've got clubs in North America. There's one in Texas, and they play in Texas. There's some that have been playing in Indiana, and then there's some in Europe. There's one that was recently played in Belgium, and all this stuff. So all these people that always talk about, you can't have big parties and the whole DM 1 to 20 ratio thing. No, some of them are on YouTube filmed. I bookmarked one. It was called "The World Upheaved" or something. It was a war game that included the American Revolution, but it was broader than that. It was about the Europeans, discovering North America and their squabbles about resources and colonization and all that. The Dutch, the French, the Spaniards, the British, all that sort of thing. And it was a pretty big game. Stuff happened across the Atlantic. There was the naval aspect, and then there was warfare, and of course you had to deal with native tribes and the whole 9 yards. It was a pretty complicated game. And they played the whole thing in an afternoon or two in Indiana at a hotel, and everybody paid to play, and the people ran it. It was great. So all this, it can't be done because it takes too much time. No, I don't agree. I got all sorts of examples like that. I remember going to a well, this was just a board game geek post, but there was a board game geek post where everybody talked about war games that couldn't be played, and because they took too long. It was 3 pages of people talking about it, and then at the end of it, there's a bunch of people that showed pictures um, that that showed them playing the whole game. So I always like to see that kind of cliche proved wrong, stuff like that. Anybody else? I can't see how many people are connected. So if you're connected and you haven't spoken up, go ahead and type in the thing and say hi. I'd love to have a little conversation with people. Um, I guess I covered pretty much everything on what I was talking about. But I just kind of like the idea in fact, maybe it's just talking with people because I don't think I'm going to have much of a chance to do it in the next God knows how long. So I'm just kind of leaving it open for conversation. Oh, at the God, one of there's several I played. I remember RPG. There was a kind of a war game RPG hybrid system that was fun. It was one of the first computer assisted things that I'd ever seen. And I mean, this is old as hell. This is like '83 with a dot matrix and all that. And what you would do is um, it didn't use disks. It used like there used to be computers that were fed cardboard cards, and you'd punch holes in the cards in different places, and that's how it would be programmed. And this thing was similar. Um, it used that kind of punch card programming. So you would go to the station. It was about gladiatorial combat. You go to the station, you make up a character, and you'd give it a name, and then the computer would randomly generate its attributes for you. And then you would give, uh, I believe you could buy weaponry for it. They would give you a random amount of money, and you could buy gladiatorial gear for him or her. And then when it was your turn to fight, it was a tournament. When your turn to fight would come up, you'd be hand one of these punch cards, and you would give a list of attacks and defenses based on attacks you perceive to see or expect to get from the person you were fighting. And they would punch. So you would go about 5 or 6 minutes out, if I remember right, each round, what you were going to do versus what the other person was going to do. And then they were multiple choice. So you'd go and you'd punch them out. And they would feed this thing in, and then they would have a narrative result. You know, command post gaming gladiator guy slashed Raven Walger through you know, through the arm, and all, just little statements like that. And you'd have to pay a couple of bucks, and then they would give you each this readout. And if you lived through it and you had all your extremities, then you could go to the next round. And it was just a tournament. They fought all weekend doing that. That was a lot of fun. And everybody had fun. It didn't matter to the game, but just for the role playing aspect, you had a little bit of a backstory, and people were having a lot of fun. Of course, political correctness was minimal, so you could make jolly remarks about your character and his drunkenness or stuff like that. Yeah, it was really fun. It was a blast. And I don't remember what they had. They had some ridiculously old, you know, uh, early laptop that looked, 15 pounds of heavy metal and with a 5-inch liquid crystal display, typical of the era, and it was parked next to this even larger, loud as hell dot matrix that would spit this information out as you played it. It's fun as hell. Um, that was one of the great things, and there's just a lot of really humorous things happening with that game, and people would come around and chat with one another, and we discuss your character and what was happening. It was just a lot of fun. Um, I got to play a naval war game with the co-author of Hunt for October. It was Hunt for October, the famous movie, based on the novel. The novel was written by Tom Clancy and co-authored by a guy named Larry Bond. And Larry Bond created one of the best modern naval miniature war games of the 80s called Harpoon. It was so well done. He's a retired naval officer now, but at the time he was an active naval officer, and they used that system to train all their naval cadets at the warfare school and at Annapolis. They eventually made it into a computer game as well. And Larry, along with making several other fictitious books about modern warfare, some that are really good, uh, he he made this harpoon, and he was selling it. So I got put on a list because I had an ins with TSR to play this exclusive game with Larry, where he was opening up his third edition. He was selling the third edition of the game, and he ran it, and he was the opposing forces. And we got to play with him, and that was a blast. So they pull you in, and they set you down in a little room with a projector and a briefing, and Larry gives you a briefing, just like you're going to war. Here's the situation, here's the groups, here's who's assigned to what, and here's what you're supposed to do. Very immersive. And then when you're released from the briefing, you walk over to the game room, which is this giant roped off like 20 by 20 foot section of floor where he's got all these small miniatures, naval miniatures, laid out to fight this big battle out. It was great. That was a lot of fun. That was one of the better war games I ever played. It didn't last very long. Larry was the enemy, but it was fun to play. Um, one year there was how's it going, sister? There was one year there was I forget what they did, the token battles in miniature. This was real early, one of the first ones, but it was 1-for-1. They had thousands, but what they did is they promoted the thing. Some guy built the castle and the battlefield, and then they promoted a year early. They said, bring your own miniatures. Here's how you mark your miniatures. Here's how you have to paint them this way. You have to put this on the base so we know that they're your property. They're going to be pooled together to form a 1-for-1 army. And they fought out these token battles. They were gigantic, and you had to. It wasn't on a table that was lifted; it was too big. So it was a table that was on the floor, and they had they had the tables off their legs, laid out on the floor, and they were supported by wooden beams. And everybody had to take off their shoes, and they had to walk around certain paths on this board to be able to move their stuff around, so it wouldn't get messed up. And they had the whole thing roped off so people wouldn't knock it or anything like that. It was just incredible. The biggest mistake I made at the con was I couldn't afford a camera, and it wasn't, it's too far back, and their pocket shots weren't really a thing. You could have like a handheld Polaroid, but they sucked, especially in bad lighting conditions. So I never took a lot of pictures, and I regret it to this day because I've got all these great stories, but I've got no visual pictures to go along with it. But it was just phenomenal. There's thousands of elves, elf painted miniatures. Oh God, it was great doing these token battles. So I remember playing in a dungeon crawl where there was 50 people. It was a giant dungeon crawl. Some guy had built this dungeon. I don't like, like some people work on train sets. This guy just spent all year building this gigantic dungeon, miniature dungeon, and there was 50 players to do the crawl, all at the same time. I don't remember how big that thing was, but it was probably maybe 12 by 12 or something like that. I mean, it was big enough that you had to let the guy who was the GM move your stuff for you. He had built it so that he could stand in the center of it. There was a hole in the center where he would crawl under the table and then stand up through the hole, and he could reach inside the places that you couldn't get at from standing on the edge of it. And that's how you marked your miniatures. And everybody had to bring your own miniature to represent your character, and we played through the whole thing. And you'd play through the whole weekend. You'd play a little bit, and then we'd do a turn, and you'd do your action, stuff like that. And then you'd go take a break, go, sit down, let him cogitate and set everything up for the next turn. We'd do several turns a session. Then you'd break, you'd go play another game, you come back, and you just played it all through the weekend. It was gorgeous. It was this giant dungeon. Well painted, well done. Really a lot of fun. I played I used to play all sorts of really fun things. What are some of the more another role-playing one that was fun? Well, I played what was the deal with that? It was really a real fun adventure we played where you were it was like island hopping, and you were looking for a thief that had stolen a magic sword somehow. But you were on this it wasn't a checkerboard, but there was kind of this maze of small islands, real small, and you would get different clues as to which island this thief was on, and you had to sail from island to island. And there was a lot of every time you made a trek from one island to the other, there was some sea monster that would try to sink your ship. So the idea is that you wanted to be as efficient as possible in solving the riddle. There was a riddle as to which one this guy was on, and each island had a clue, and it would, you'd think about what it was saying, and you'd try to go to the next island based on the clue. But it was always a perilous journey because something was going to jump you in the water. Very, very fun. I'm probably not doing it much justice, but we got killed. We didn't make it through. We eventually got killed, but it was still a blast. And I used to die in these things too. So not like these days where we all got wasted by some underwater deal. Some of the other great things I saw. First time I ever saw a local area network game ever was at Gen Con in Milwaukee. They had one set up between two computers that one was across the street in the hotel and the other one was in the exhibit hall, and you could play it like a demonstration. That was fun. The first time I ever saw that technology. There was what else I see? BattleTech pods. You ever heard of BattleTech pods? That was a fun one. They're these circular sit-down arcade machines that when you sat down in it, it was like a cockpit of a battle mech. And there wasn't just a joystick and a few buttons. There was dials and shit everywhere. This was all custom done. If you put in BattleTech pods in the search engine, you might be able to see a picture of these things, and they were outstandingly fun, and they were all connected. Oh yeah, I had never, I didn't know that that was even a thing at the time, and that was Mech Warrior as well, and the graphics were shit, but it didn't matter because you were playing against an actual human being on another computer somewhere. And that was the beginning of PCs becoming a thing at Gen Con. Before that, you never saw a computer anywhere. Some people had laptops and stuff like that. I brought my Tandy 600 laptop to play war games, but this was the first time I saw any exhibit that involved computers. And by the late 80s, there was a whole computer section at Gen Con. In fact, I played Falcon 3.0 in a tournament. That was fun. Just, aces, fighting each other on the thing. Um, oh, the pods were great. So, and then they had some in a couple of places that you could go to. There was one on Navy Pier, and I don't know what happened. So, very few of these things exist. They made 3 different versions of it. Whatever I don't even know who they are, but some company did it, and they made 3 versions improving on this stuff. And these things were finicky, and they were expensive, and they were hard to run, and because it cost so much, they took a lot of energy and stuff like that. Because they cost so much, um, they were expensive, so they never really did well as a business venture. But wow, they were great. And I don't remember how many they made, but I read that there's still maybe 20 or 30 of these units left around. A lot of them got junked or ran out of parts or burned out. But there's a place somewhere in the Twin Cities that has about 8 or 9 of them hooked up still that you can play. But it's, it's like 10, $15 an hour because they're so hard to maintain, and they take up so much energy. But they were fun. God, they were fun. So you had a huge line. You didn't get to play very much. You had to stand in this big line and pay like $5 or $10 just to play for 15 or 20 minutes. But it was worth it because it was just grand. Um, that was some of the cooler stuff I seen at Gen Con. Had another thing that really wasn't a game, but it was always fun. Was they had Klingons that would come around, and I forget, they were working for a charity. I forget what charity it was, but all the proceeds went to some good cause. And you could go to this jailhouse. They had just a cell erected in a hallway, and you could have your friend incarcerated by the Klingons. You'd see everybody had a name tag at Gen Con. You were required to wear a name tag with a badge that proved that you had paid admission. So you just gave the person's name and their badge number if you had it, and you gave it to the Klingons, and you made a donation, and then they would send 2 of their Klingon warriors scouring through the crowds looking for this individual. And they were loud, they played Klingons, and where is, Bill Smith, and we're looking for this man, and people would help them and point them out and whatever, and they put them in the jail. And then the way you got out is you had to sing Klingon battle or drinking songs, and you had to do it right. And then once you got enough of the words right, they would let you out. It was fun as hell. Shit like that was great. We had all sorts of little gimmicks like that going on. Yeah. Oh, yeah. When they first did it, they even let you carry weapons, fake weapons. And then some Kyle's mom got pissed about that, and then they finally had to put the kibosh on that. So it kind of ruined, the Klingon vibe, because before that they were walking around with batless and stuff like that, and disruptor pistols and stuff. So, but yeah, the costume thing evolved quite a bit because. As once the 80s kind of bled away, the 90s came in, and there was more of this. Well, we don't want people to look too sexy. We had one chick show up one time, and she was wearing next to nothing, and what she was wearing was ring mail, and she was one of these uh, like a Boris Viallo painting, but real. She was going for that vibe. And you know, I'm not I'm not justifying anything, but you're showing a a hell of a nice body, um, and a lot of it to a lot of incels that never, you know, and and it was the early '80s, so uh, it got a little stupid. Some of these nerdy virgins started getting. She wasn't raped or anybody touched her, but the cat calling and the dumb shit like that. And they finally threw those clowns out. Thank God. There was a group of them that were really starting to harass her like pieces of, just stupid nerds that had no uh, manners or social graces, and they were ejected, and rightfully so. But um, and one bad apple spoils the bunch. Then all of a sudden, the people were, well, we better do something about this. We don't want to have some sort of sexual lawsuit. And I understand it. I understand why they have that. It's just a shame it had to come to that because there was a lot of fun before that. So those kind of little incidents ended up tuning the the costume party down. One time there was a gal, she was middle aged or whatever, and she was a good looking gal, but she was dressed like Elvira, but she was showing a lot of booby, and nobody cared. It was an 18 or over situation, and she got a lot of stares, but she didn't care. Um, and you could have fun like that, and people got real creative, but um, they started killing it and adding more and more rules. So that kind of ruined the deal. But before that, there was a lot of cool. So there was laser tag. We used to play laser tag. There was they where the Bucks played, the the professional NBA team from Milwaukee, the Milwaukee Bucks, where they played. They converted the basketball arena and the floor. They they turned it into this maze where you'd play laser tag, which was this home toy. It was a little pistol and a sensor that you put on your chest, and you had this helmet and stuff like that. And you would play, 25 guys on a team, and you'd all be running through this maze inside this giant arena. God, it was a blast. Um, yeah, yeah, it was fun. Anyway, and it went on for years, and then some guy fell down and hurt himself, and then the insurance people come in, and then it goes away. That kind of shit. Yeah, yeah. But it wasn't. There was a lot of them. It was some group that had a whole, 20 or 30 of these things or whatever, and it was fun. But just like everything, somebody fall down, go boom, and then the insurance people go, "Oh God, we got to stop doing that." So some of those kind of fun things got killed off. Then they closed down the bar in late '80s or whatever. But when it first started, there was a lounge for people that were over 18 because the drinking age was 18 back then. And all sorts of fun. Oh, geez. Then there was the Great Hall exit. Just going to the Great Hall, which is where all the new products were being sold, and all the companies had their booths where they would sell you their games and stuff like that, and they had big displays. That alone was worth the price of admission. In fact, some people would just come in off the street and pay gate money just to go through the Great Hall and look at everything. And there was demos. Best thing people could do is find a way to bring that back. Best way to sell a product is to just have the damn thing laid out, people playing it. There was plenty of great, when they say Great Hall, they ain't fucking around. This place was huge. You couldn't see from one end to the other. And uh, so you could have a booth, and then you could have tables laid out where you could, demonstrate your games. People would come in and they would play demos. And it was fun as hell. I played a game in 1984 that was a homemade game. This guy was very clever. He made a Risk variant type of game but it was all about oil wars. It was all about nuclear weaponry, but it was comedic. It was a parody. And you had these act of God cards, and the guy was really funny. He wrote out these funny little sayings on the cards, and then the cards would do certain things. Like there was one where there was a fluke earthquake in Montana, and it launched two missiles out of the silos of Montana, and it would start a war between the Soviets and stuff like that. Um, yeah, it got bad, just like everything. I People probably when they're younger they hate to hear it, but back in my day, and it was when it first started, everything was cheap or at least relatively affordable. It was fun. There weren't a lot of rules. Hell, there was smoking lounges and shit like that. In fact, there was one hall where you could just smoke right at the table while you're playing a game and everything. Of course, a lot of people don't like that idea, and maybe it is a bad idea, but it was very, and then as it got more commercially successful, it got more expensive because there was more things being put into it, the production value, blah, blah, blah. Then, like I said, the insurance people get involved. Oh, we don't want the drinking and all this shit. And sometimes, um, your success is your own demise. And to some degree, that happened with Mecca. It just got so damn big and so commercial that it got too expensive and it kind of choked itself out and had to move away. But in fact, the last couple of years at Mecca, Microsoft started showing up, and everybody was pretty pissed about that. Nobody was, you know, I mean, and they took over the Great Hall. They would rent out this huge space in the Great Hall because they had a bunch of money and stuff like that. And everybody's like, this is about tabletop gaming, enough with the computers and all that. So, but the corporate get involved, and it got so big that the city couldn't handle the people coming in. There was 50,000 or more people coming down a day for this thing out of 4 days, and we didn't have the lodging for it because the people that ran Milwaukee couldn't think ahead. So, and then the company that was running the convention, it was TSR for a while, and then it was a private company. Then they went to Indianapolis, and Indianapolis doesn't have very much lodging either. So I don't know how they're living that way down there, but yeah, I remember the Violent Femmes played the last year. They had a giant. They actually shut down. This is rare. They shut down a main thoroughfare through downtown to let this group called the Violent Femmes. I don't know if you're familiar with their music, but they're a local band. They got started. I saw them before they made it big. They made it big enough that they played SNL once, and then they kind of faded away. But I saw them in the early years playing at some dive bar in Milwaukee, and they played the last Gen Con. It was great. That was the send off. It was a lot of fun. I can again, just once through. Yep, that was them. And they get on there like, we don't understand what you're doing here, but we support your right to do it. And then, oh God, it was fun. And everybody was getting fucked up on the street because that was it. It was going to be over. And they let us drink at they had to cordon the place off, but you could drink on the street. And oh God, what a ball. It was so fun. And that was it. I went to Indianapolis a couple of times, but it was anticlimactic. It wasn't the same thing. But Milwaukee was great because it didn't end. It didn't end after the place would shut down at midnight. And if you ever been to Wisconsin, you try not to find a bar. You can't look in a direction and not they're everywhere. And back then it was even more so. So you'd all just file out and you'd go to the local taverns and shit like that, or people would play in the hallways of the Hyatt. Because the Hyatt was making so much business, they didn't give a shit. They'd let you lay a game out on the floor and make their patrons have to walk around you and shit. And they had little lounges. You could play in the lounge. You could play in the bar. There was people everywhere playing games, board games, RPGs, just sitting in. Fuck. I saw guys playing a war game called Up Front on a park bench outside of the Mecca at like 1:30 at night. But we used to go to a bar and play a role-playing game called Toon. It was all about cartoon characters, making up your own cartoon character and doing crazy cartoon stuff. And because nobody gave a shit about political correctness, you could have some fun. It got a little adult and a little raw, but it was a bar. It was, there wasn't any kids in there. We would have so much fun. We'd get totally drunk, play tune, get crazy, go to bed, get a couple hours of sleep, wake up at 8 a.m. and be back at the con because we were young enough we could tolerate that, you know. Yeah, yeah. It was, you know, they didn't. They were making so much money off the thing they didn't care. There was catwalks across the street that led into the hotel, and there's people sitting on the floor of the catwalk playing these games and shit. And so it was everywhere, and it would go on all night until, you know, and then people would finally crash and get up. And when people are young enough that they could handle that, or most people were, you know. So we would play all night. We usually played tune at this one bar after the thing was over, and I would get my money's worth. Man, I was young enough I could do it all. I'd get up at 8 o'clock, or, you know, and play all day, go have some dinner, and then go drinking on my fake ID and play tune or something like that. And then when it was over on Sunday, there was a guy that would host a big Space Hulk game, and we'd go over to his place. He would live down on the south side of the city, so it was a little bit of a jaunt. But I'd get a ride with a guy I know, and we'd all go down to this guy's place, and he'd have 3 rooms of his house would be filled with Space Hulk maze, and we'd just play this gigantic game till about midnight on Sunday, and then everybody would go back to their hotel and catch their flight out on Monday. Whoever didn't already fly out, you know. A lot of us were local, so it didn't matter. Like me, I could just go home. But yeah, we had an annual game, and then some people would come in on Wednesday, even though things started on Thursday. So you go down there Thursday night, and there'd be people playing already, and the thing hadn't even opened up yet. It was gamers paradise, and I've never seen but 10% of it, because there's just too damn much going on. There'd be games on floors, and then there'd be whole floors of nothing but movies being shown. You could have watch parties. There's people doing that sort of thing. There was uh, there was experts giving talks on all sorts of subjects. I went to one time where it was um, sword play in movies, history versus Hollywood, and they would take scenes from movies, and this is why this isn't real, and this is how this fight would go on, and they would explain the type of sword and why it was the wrong choice for the go through the whole thing. The guy was a weapons expert, and he gave like an hour and a half talk on the whole thing. It was great. There was all sorts of stuff. There was soldiers. I saw guys like Larry Bond show up in uniform giving talks about the Cold War and, you know, Soviet sub technology and shit, everything. You know, how to be a better player in role playing games. I can't even think of all this stuff. There was even people doing crafts. There was a whole craft section I very rarely would go and see. People making their own miniatures. People making um, Cthulhu plushies. I saw a gal that would sew up a Cthulhu plushie for you. You know, handmade bracelets and LARPing gear and all sorts of shit. You know, just and then there was a big art uh, display. There was a whole room that was nothing but an art gallery. And then on Saturday night, I think it was, they had an art auction. Oh Jesus! See, and I heard people talking about that, and yeah, yeah. Like I said, I stopped. I went a couple of times to Indianapolis, and the one time I didn't even get to go into the con because the friend I was with, all I don't know how he got it because I was fine and I was riding right next to him, but somehow he got some whooping cough or something, and he had to go. He was feeling bad, so we had to punch out early. I kind of had to give up my trip, and so he tried to make it up to me, and we went back the next year, and it just wasn't the same. It just it didn't have the charm. It was in a very restricted area, and there was nothing around there. You had to drive way out of town to get anything to eat. That was the great thing about the con was you didn't have to go to the concession stand and pay top dollar for a $5 pretzel and a watered down soda. You could leave the convention. You would have a stamp, and the other thing you can't miss in Milwaukee are restaurants. The shit was everywhere. You'd go down uh, to Third and Juno and get a Chicago dog for peanuts. Nothing. Why the hell would I go pay $5 for a shitty ballpark pretzel when I can go down to Third and Juno and for half that price get this kick ass? There was great food everywhere. So in Indianapolis, shit, you had to drive 20 minutes just to find a cousin's. It was horseshit. But and I there were days or years, I should say, where I had enough money where I could consider going back. And once COVID hit, everybody's like, don't even. And now it's just a bunch of sparkle troll bullshit. I wouldn't want to go back to a convention even if I had the money and time to do it. You'll never uh, replicate the the wonder and amazement and the depth and the you just you can't bring back Gen Con. They killed it, man. But in the 80s, it was just the greatest show on earth. I mean, some of the stuff you'd see, oh God, and people dressed up and having fun, and nobody, there were a couple assholes. There's always assholes, but 99% of these people, complete strangers and totally friendly with you. I had 2-hour conversations and drinks with people that I never met and never saw again. Hey, come on, sit down, we're eating. It was just great. Everybody was on the same page. We were all gamers, we were all comrades. And now you'd never see that shit. Yeah, yeah, it was great. It was great, and it's gone. And it's sad that it just won't come back. Um, so, but all we've got is and even some of the there's even less uh, picture records of it. Years ago, even on the internet, you could like look it up and see some of the pictures. There's very rarely anything like that now. It used to be everywhere. So, but yeah, man, I mean, just gaming in general. There was all sorts of people making their own magazines. It was everywhere. You didn't have to go to these corporate people. There was guys, uh, Fight in the Sky Society, Mike Carr, of RPG fame. He also made a game called Dawn Patrol, which was kind of a role playing game slash war game about World War One biplane pilots, and it had his own magazine, and the magazine wasn't. They didn't take it to a publisher or anything like that. They handmade that bitch. They used uh, ditto machines and ink and all that stuff, and the group would charge money for it so that they could pay for the costs of creating it. But they weren't out to make money. It was part of the joy and the fun of being in that club. And I joined it. It was like $12 a year. They would send you these issues, and they were hand printed, black and white ink. Shit, man, they were great. And there was all sorts of stuff like that. And now it's all big money. Yeah, I've heard people say there's a couple. Dungeon Delver told me he says if you want to get a taste of Gen Con, at least a that Gary Con in Indiana is the closest thing he's ever been. He says it's much smaller. But he says if you want to see late 70s, early 80s Gen Con, go there. And then there's Venger Con. I was talking to Venger about that, and I says, I told him about a month and a half ago that I'd love to go, but I didn't think I was going to have the money. But if things broke my way, I would definitely be out there. Unfortunately, they did not break my way, and I was on. I knew I was on the edge then, but I was hoping that I It'd work out, but it wasn't. So I won't be going. And I'm not that far away. Madison's not that far away. Hell, it's a less than 2 hours from where I'm at. But I don't even own a car, so won't be going. But it sounded like it would be a lot of fun. So it's a shame. But yeah, look at Gary Con, according to Delver, and I know Delver. He's old TSR, and he knew Gary and all that. So he's my age. I remember him. So from the cons, that's another. People are, as friendly and nice as it was. There are a lot of people that didn't have proper social graces. I knew people that I saw every year that I only recognized by face, and never they were very friendly, but never once did they go, "Hey, by the way, my name is," or anything about them. You just recognize them by face and by badge. And I wouldn't remember names unless I was properly introduced. It was fine, but it was weird, you know. So strange stuff like that. But there was a group of people that I would only see at Gen Con every year, and we always, oh yeah, give me a call, but they were people from Kansas and shit, so I never ended up seeing them or anything like that. But they were friendly, all through hung out with them because I'd go down there alone. I didn't have any friends at the time that were into the stuff to go with me, so I go down there alone and I'd make friends and just hang out with people I saw. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It was, it, and I went before Gen Con, and it was different then. It was fun, but it was different. It was at a convention or a college, I should say. The convention was at a college called Gateway, and it was very small and it was a little bit different. There wasn't all the fanfare. It was just a bunch of guys playing on tables at the convention. It was fun, but it was different. And then Mecca really gave us the room, or gave them the room to make something big out of it. So, and there was ones even before that. It was called Gen Con for Geneva. It was, TSR being Lake Geneva. It actually was out in Lake Geneva. I'm a little too young for those, but I'm just, I was a young kid, and it was before Adam Walsh and I mean, people weren't aware of, you know, uh, child snatching like they were now. We would play outside till it got dark out and not be worried about it. Um, Things like that happened, um, but not like before. It wasn't until Adam Walsh, which was in the 80s, that it really became something that was scared everybody. So they would take me as a young kid, you know, pretty young, probably too young, but um, and they just dropped me off there and never suspected anything bad would happen. And I never, obviously, nothing ever did. But I was a pretty young kid to be playing games, and most of these guys were a lot older than me, and they were all male and stuff like that. And but it was still fun. But I kind of got some sneers, and some people told me they didn't want me to play because I was too young and stuff like that. But by the time it got to Mecca, I was old enough that you know I fit in with a crowd. But I remember that, man. It was great. Mike Carr, it was with the probably the game I played the most, because it was tradition, was the Dawn Patrol game. That was every Saturday morning of the con. They had this big Dawn Patrol game, and I always play in it. There was about 100 people, um, not all at the same time. It was split between two sessions, 50 apiece, if you're lucky. That was about the biggest that I remember. Sometimes it was smaller, but every year it was tradition. And then Sunday afternoon, there'd be I think it was, I remember it was Sunday afternoon, there'd be a luncheon, and they would give away awards for who had the most kills, and you know who survived the most bullets without being shot down and shit like that. That was the club. That was fun. Played played in that all the time with Mike, and Yeah, all sorts of. It was another game that I would play a lot of, where people were like, "There's no way you could finish that war game." Europa. This thing was 12 feet by 8 feet. They had it on a table most years. One year they actually hung it like wallpaper and had magnets. And it was the pieces were, it was World War II. It was about the entire Eastern Front, and it was done in division level. And they were 5.25 inch squares that were the little pieces, tiny little mother. And they had one for every division in the war. There was thousands. They would stack some real high. And I mean, it was just this. I could show. I put that picture out on here. I'll put this out. You wait till you see this thing. It and it was just, people would look at it like, that would take forever. And but they played that game. It took a year. It was the entire Second World War. Of course, it took a year. And uh, but we would play scenarios, big scenarios about the Eastern Front, and people would look at it and just go, "Wow," we couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was so huge. Um, but I used to love showing people the pictures of the club who would play it, and prove them wrong. Prove, yeah, we could play that. Take some time. Yep. So, a lot of fun that way. So, lots of different games like that. That were a lot of fun. uh, Trying to think. Although the 4-foot Star Destroyer game was another, probably, if I really had to pick one out of them all, just because I'm such a Star Wars fanatic, that was probably the best thing. I'm walking around the con looking at some of the games. I had some time off, and I had a guest. I very rarely had a guest, but I had this guy that I had met, and I said, "Why don't you meet me down there? I'll show you this place." He was trying to get into gaming and get into gaming retail, and I took him down. He goes, "Hey, you got to see this. Have you ever seen this before?" And I go, "What are you talking about?" And he took me over to this booth at the Great Hall, where these two great looking gals. I mean, these chicks were sexy. One was a redhead, one was a brunette, and they were wearing skin tight outfits, black with red stripes, and they were carrying these model guns like Alien. They were huge, and they were just carrying these. And I was, wow, I was checking these chicks out, man, because you don't really see a lot of women at these things. At least back then, you didn't. And he goes, "Look, man," and in this guy's booth, he had giant now you can see these things all over. There's like modelers magazines where people have made this, but nobody had made these before. These were where this all originated. This guy had he had Battlestar Galactica. It must have been 4.5 feet long. It was this just huge model of Battlestar Galactica. And then he had the Pegasus, and he had a Star Destroyer, and a Nebulon B frigate, and a bunch of capital ships from Star Wars. He had some Star Trek. He had the old Constitution class, uh, and just a ton of sci-fi stuff. Buck Rogers, Star Trek, Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, Space. Was it Space 2000 from the 70s, and um, uh, all sorts of stuff. This is before the 90s. There's no Babylon 5 or anything like that, but there's just a ton of cool shit. And I said, "Wow, those are really neat. I love models." And the guy goes, "We're playing games with them." And that's where you get the record scratch where I took, because I was walking away. I'm like, "Oh yeah, models are really neat, but I want to go play some games." And the guy says, "We're playing games with these models." What? So I went and signed up for this, man. And they had the Star Destroyer was so big you had to push it around on caster wheels. You couldn't put your arm around this thing. Like, I couldn't give it a hug. It was just gigantic. It looked like the one ILM was using. It was just gorgeous. And they had an interdictor cruiser with it too, and You would play these giant, like if you ever seen the game Armada, imagine that game, but like 100 times bigger in scale. The models, like big enough that you'd have to carry them around in your arm like this. That's what they were doing, and they had micro machine uh, fighters that they had mounted on dowels. There was a long dowel, and they had little, like, I guess they were pins or something that they had shoved these plastic galoob miniatures into to create little four flight fighters. They had TIE fighters and X Wings and Y Wings, B Wings, A Wings, all of them. And then they had them for Buck Rogers. The draconian ships and the Buck Rogers fighters, and they had the Vipers, and oh man, it was just glorious. And I would play every one because I love space battles. Then there was BattleTech was another one where they had Gen Con always had, they were like Texas of games. They would have these gigantic versions of games. And there was an outfit called Armor Tech that made BattleTech mechs, but they were about maybe 18 inches high, just giant. And then they were all resin cast in molded and then painted, and they made terrain for it too. And the stuff was too big and expensive for most people to buy. So they kind of, I don't know if they're still around or not, but you really needed a gymnasium floor for this stuff. But at the con where you had plenty of room on the floor, these guys would try to, entice you into buying the stuff by setting up a giant BattleTech game. And it was another one of these deals where you had to take off your shoes and you could only walk in certain places because everything was made out of this resin cast, which was nice stuff, especially you paint it up. But it would shatter if you weren't careful with it. But these mechs were giant. And that was a lot of fun. And they had tanks and stuff like that too. And then they would use little toy action figures for mechs and elementals and things like that. And they play these giant games. There's all sorts of the giant games were a gas like that. Playing Star Wars miniatures battles, but using Kenner toys instead of the 25 millimeter miniatures. That was another one some guy did. All Kenner toys, but a war game. It's just the greatest thing ever, man. Oh wow, yeah. There was an Axis. Somebody made an Axis and Allies, but custom made. I don't know how he did it, what he used for a printer, but he made an Axis and Allies board that was so big you had to walk on it, and they didn't use plastic. They would use die cast miniature tanks and toys to represent the planes and stuff like that. And then they did another Axis and Allies where somebody put it on a giant globe. So it wasn't a flat board. You had to stand around and twist this giant globe to play Axis and Allies. God, it was great. Yeah, I used to do that as a kid. There was and that was another thing that was a tradition at Gen Con was a game called Fuzzy Heroes. And it was just that. It was a bunch of toys, plushy toys, and you used them as monsters. And you played like Rampage. You made up a name for the thing. You gave it some powers. You rolled up a couple of attributes for it, and then you put it into this giant city, and then everybody else played against you, and it was like a Godzilla movie, but instead you were using plushy stuffed toys to knock down these buildings and fight each other. It was just made up toy game. And they did the same thing called Plastic Heroes, and it was all whatever toy you could bring. If you wanted to bring your Optimus Prime Transformer, you could bring it, and it was just like that. But I used to do that too. I did it with Cowboys and Indians as a young kid before I started playing. Well, that's really how I started with wargaming. Is I had toy soldiers made by Timmy Toys and Marks. Marks were World War II, and Timmy Toys were my Cowboys and Indians. and I'd take them outside in my sandbox and I'd play with them. And then I had friends come over, and we would get into the arguments. Pew pew pew! I shot you. No, I ducked it. No, blah blah. We get in these fights. So then we started to give it some structure by rolling dice. I said, here, what we'll do, we'll flip a coin. If it's tails, you miss, and we didn't like the coin, so we got out dice. So that's when these people that were visiting my parents that worked with my dad. I was playing with my toy soldiers and then a plastic toy set called the Guns of Navarone, which is an old '60s war movie, and I was doing it. And I was writing down some ideas for this game, and I was playing with dice and stuff. And these visitors were sitting at a kitchen table with my parents drinking a beer, and they could look out the window and see me playing with it. And this guy came out, him and another dude, and they walked up to me and asked me what I was doing. And I told them what was going on, and they said, well, that's very interesting. And, that was it. They came back the next week. I was out there playing with my friends, and the guy goes, somebody's here to see you. I thought it was another friend. I came out, and it was these two older men again. And their name was Zimmerman and Myers was their last name. I forget their first names. They were Mr. Zimmerman and Mr. Myers. And they actually made a war game. They had a war game club and a war game publishing company in Milwaukee, or in Sheboygan, near Milwaukee. And the club was in Wauwatosa, which is a suburb of Milwaukee. And they made a game called Zimmerman, or it was called Angrief, printed by Zimmerman and Myers. You can look it up. Anyway, these guys brought me a copy of Angrief and said, here, use these and play. Now you can play a real war game with your toy soldiers. And that's how I started playing war games. And I asked my dad where I could get more games from Zimmerman and Myers. And one had retired and one had passed away. So he called up the one that was retired, and he sent me to a guy named Gary Bloom in downtown Milwaukee. And he took over for these guys. And I played with them. That's how I started playing war games. Oh, yeah. There's a place called Toy Soldier Company online, and they will sell you giant play sets. They're outstanding. There's a couple other places. I can't think of them right now, but the one of the better ones was Toy Soldier Company. And I mean, they'll sell you. They got some big sets, and we thought about selling them. Me and this buddy of mine that I used to hang out with thought about doing that too. They got World War II, Napoleonics, and all that stuff. And we thought about selling those as a kit, and then having our own war game, because we made up our own war game. We were going to put our war game pamphlet in with the set, and we were going to buy the set from this company, and you just buy it in a great big box. But what we were going to do is we were going to take that set and we were going to put it inside wooden ammo boxes. We had found a bunch of wooden ammo boxes that we had bought from the Army base out just west of Madison, called Fort McCoy. And we were going to do that. And when we ran out of them, we were going to see if we could buy lumber and make more. They're not difficult to make. You just buy some hinges and stuff like that. And we wanted to sell those as a novelty item, where you'd buy a set. Here's a 1/32 scale miniature set, a platoon of mechanized World War II infantry, and your game. So read your rules, and then have your buddy go buy some German infantry, and you can go have a battle with your sets. We thought about doing that, and then reality set in. You don't have the money or anything like that. We made a couple of sets though, and we would take them out to the beach and play with them. We'd load them into the guy's minivan. He had about, I don't know, I think we had like 9 boxes, all filled with 1/32 World War II soldiers. Pre-painted stuff called Forces of Valor and 21st Century Toys and stuff. They were nice. I used to have pictures of that, but I don't know what I did with the pictures. But yeah, we used to do that kind of stuff. We made up our own rules. They were just based off the things that we learned from Zimmerman and Myers, or I'd learned, and shit like that. Wargaming's simple. eventually everybody says, "Oh yeah, I just want simple war games." Okay, start with those, but eventually you'll be like, "Well, I can't. These war games are so simple; they don't have bridge crossing or airborne, or I want to add something to it." So you end up getting something, where you need comprehensive rules anyway. They don't have to be complicated to be comprehensive. They just have to cover all the different angles, which is what we did. And we were going to sell them in sections, platoon leader, company commander, uh, and or different MOSs. Here's all your rules about engineers, and they would have the engineer MOS on the book, which I've done all that. I have all that stuff ready to sell. What I don't have is an audience willing to buy. And I wish I had more time because I think I could generate one. I've been trying. I was trying to learn how to market. I was trying to learn how to do all this stuff. I don't know much about computers. I'm old and shit like that. The only thing I know about computers is to play games on them. But I know how to work on computer networks, but I didn't know anything about, making websites and marketing and all that sort of stuff. And I was trying to get into that so I could just make a little side business and keep a roof over my head and sell this stuff. Well, a little too late, but yeah, that was what I planned to do. I have a role. I still have all the rules. I turned them into a role playing game / war game. I've got all that stuff out there, and I I was going to put it on RPG drive through, and then people kept saying, well, those guys are real censorious and blah blah blah. They don't. So I was waiting, and then I was going to talk to the guy at what's the other big one? Big Geek Emporium. And I talked to a guy who was going to help me promote this stuff called Play Games or something like that. And yeah, that's the one I was going to do. And I had a guy that was going to promote the stuff for me. I just needed to save some money to get some illustrations to put into these books. I've got a fantasy RPG too. I'm just heartbroken that I didn't get a chance to sell that stuff. And maybe part of it was I didn't move fast enough. And I don't know what I'm going to do now. I don't know where I'm going to go. I don't even know where I'm going to be living. But I got all that stuff stowed away. And if I had just maybe made a couple of sales, maybe things would be different. So, pretty bummed out. All I need is an internet connection. I could be doing that stuff, be selling that stuff. So, tough times, man. Sucks. So, but I got the rug pulled out from under me. Nobody likes to hear excuses and stuff like that. But I got dealt some bad breaks, and I tried to recover from them as fast as I can. And unfortunately, didn't make the deadline. So, but yeah, I made that stuff up. I made all that shit up. So, as a kid, but I was never really satisfied with it. And when these guys came and brought me this on grief, I just thought, wow, everything's all set up. They've done all the work. They've got all the answers that I was looking for. So I started playing that. And then we moved into, slightly simpler, easier to read versions of it called Armored Conflict, which was done by that guy Gary I was talking about. And that's how we started. And then I went to my first friendly, neighborhood gaming store called Napoleon's, which was God, that place was great too. And I kind of got talked into buying, some off the shelf rules, which is okay. So I had those and played with them and went from there. Yeah, I do. I do. I do. I won't even have an internet connection. I got to go on the 12th, and I don't know where I'm going to go. I'm going to the government aid place and hoping that they can find some temporary lodging for me. I can stay with my parents for a week, but look how old I am. You imagine how old my parents are. They just can't, they shouldn't have to. It's the only reason they're letting me in is because my dad just had uh, uh, open heart surgery not long ago, and I plan to visit just, to connect with him after that. But I can't, Jesus, I'm grown man. I can't move back in with them. So I'm I'm uh, I'm hoping that I can find some temporary thing through the county. Some guy, what was his name? Dragon Primiarch or something like that, was nice enough to put out the word to his followers that I was looking, that I needed a room, but nobody was interested in giving. And that's all I need. I just need a room to stay in for just a brief amount of time. And maybe I'll be lucky and I'll get some aid and be able to put myself back on my feet. Yeah. So I'm going to be with them for a week or so, and then after that, I don't know where the hell I'm going to go. I'm going to see if I can find some temporary shelter through the government, and and then, but I don't know that they'll have internet connection for me, so I don't know that I'll even be on Twitter anymore or anything like that. I'll probably, I won't be able to maintain this. And I just started this with people coming in and talking to me, and I was going to use it to generate some business and have some sort of online presence. And I don't know that I'll be able to do that because I don't know where I'm staying, and I don't know if they'll have internet and whether I could use it or anything like that. So short of the finish line. So kind of a bummer. Now, when I'm at their house, I can still use my phone, and I think I set this phone up to be on Twitter. I'm hoping that it works, and then I can at least maintain some contact that way. Um, but after that, your guess is as good as mine. So that's a bummer. That's a bummer. But maybe I'll get lucky and I'll get a place to stay and I can start up again. And then I've got all this stuff from TSR that my uncle gave me that nobody's ever seen. And I wanted to sell that. I was thinking maybe I could make a lot of money off of that. But I don't have a car to mail it, even if somebody did buy it. But I'm hoping that my parents might let me borrow the car, and I was hoping that I might be able to sneak some shots and put it out on the internet, and maybe somebody be interested in buying it, or at least some of it. And there's a couple of original drawings I have that have the signature of the artist, and I wanted to show that to Dungeon Delver because I don't even know what something like that. Maybe he could tell me more details about it so I could try to put it up for sale. But take that money and maybe get a small place, or at least put it, put it towards a small place or something like that. So that's where I'm at. But yeah, I had a ton of material for game design that I wanted to do. I still got it here. Mostly World War II stuff, but also in fact, I had a module, modules, more like a demo, kind of a mini module that I wanted to take people through of my new game, my new RPG game, as a demo. I wanted to do it online. I couldn't get enough people to agree to it. I needed 3 to 5 people, and I was going to take them on a little adventure through a wizard's tower thing. And you could see how I set up my RPG. I did things different, used a couple of different ideas than the normal thing. I didn't want to make another retro clone. Wanted to make something better than that, or something different at least. I guess a better would be an opinion, or so, but at least something different. So I didn't have a lot of the usual staple things. I didn't have hit points per se. There's wound level. There's only 3 or 4 wound levels. You can. That's it. So you could call wound level hit point if you wanted to, and it's 1 through 4. So it's a very bloody game, very easy to die in. It's trying to keep people from being a murder hobo, and some other details and things like that I put into it. and that was ready to go. I just needed to demo it, and there again, I needed some money to illustrate it because I didn't have any money for illustration. That's what I was waiting for to release it. Money never came. So, what a drag, man! What a drag. But we'll see. Maybe I can make something out of it later on down the road. So, yep, yep. Just putting the word out on Twitter, see if I can get anybody else to come in and say hi. Yep. I'm trying to think of any other projects that I really had. Well, I had a couple of other things. I had this a kind of strategy world building type of game that I wanted to try and sell. Um, when I say world building, what I mean is you don't know what the terrain or what the you put down terrain as you go. It's not that I've seen other people do it. It's not like a hugely original thing, but it's I don't know what the terminology for it is, but uh, kind of a war game with a little bit of Sim City in it type of thing, and that was another deal. I was writing a sci-fi novel for a while, but I ran out of time for that. I figured if you keep writing that, you won't be able to make any money, and I was right, so I stopped. But I had that, and I was going to make a role playing game for the novel too. So I had some ideas on the pipe that I wanted to work on. So, yipper. Thanks. Yeah, that'll help. Get some people in here and say hi, so on. Some people to talk. So yeah, I'm just my buddy comes to help me tomorrow, gets some of this stuff packed up, then he comes back on Saturday and we'll be and moving the stuff out. I got somebody that's going to help me out. Well, he claims he's going to help me out with storage. I hope he's got enough room. And I'll store my gaming stuff, and then I'll be throwing myself on the mercy of the state. Yeah, the this was a thing where you draw like it was there was a like a random generator as you go, made out of cards or tiles, different types of terrain, and you drew a card and then you placed that terrain where you wanted to, and it built out into this world, and kind of like revealing Fog of War in an old RTS game. And then it had factories that you could build, and then that built troops and stuff like that. Had that all written up. But yeah, my RPG, I had random everything. I had r- random uh, dungeon generator, random hex call generator, all that stuff. So if people wanted to utilize those tables instead of having to draw out their own maps, they could do that. I had all that set up. It was going to be a nice, comprehensive little set of rules, but I thought if you don't put some illustration in it, who the hell's going to want it? Everybody likes to see pretty pictures. So, and I just couldn't spare the change. So, I mean, it wouldn't have made it different, no matter how well received it would. I don't think it would have. I would have ever sold enough to make the difference between getting me in and out of this place. But it would have been nice to at least have it out there and for sale, collecting money while I'm out in this bout wherever I go. So, um, but I just need a room, one room, and an internet connection. That's all I fucking need. So my wife left me, and I had this 2 bedroom apartment, and I dared not get rid of it because finding housing has been very difficult. I looked around to try to downgrade and get something cheaper, and I just couldn't find it. So I found myself having to we had split the costs, and then she left, and I got burdened with the whole thing, and I couldn't keep up with it all. So, and she's in a nice place because she makes more money than I do. So that's what you get. But um, disabled vet. This is what I get for it. Too bad. But it was nice of that guy. I'm trying to think of that guy's name. What was his name? Premiarch or something like that. He tried to rustle up somebody that might want to help me out, but everybody's got their own problems, so I never really got anybody to. What was it? Yeah, Dragon Premiarch 76. That's cool. It was nice of him. He tried, um, but nobody bit. So I was trying to find a roomie. Oh well, but yeah, I was trying to think anything else that I came up with. Not really. That was pretty much the book that'll never come to fruition, but it was kind of one of these dystopian deals. Yeah, I don't, I mean, where are you at? Weren't you in the Twin Cities or something like that? But yeah, I could. Oh yeah, way the hell out there. Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, yeah, if you were closer, I would be bringing my shiz. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I mean, if it's New Jersey or getting rained on, which one's so. Yeah, I there was a guy that was gonna I burned my bridge with. I didn't. That was kind of, what happened. I tried to do GMing uh, for a service, and my first GM game was a demo, and I had a couple of players get stupid and out of line and started fighting with one another, and I booted them both because I thought I don't want you guys ruining this for me because there's other players and I need reviews. And the one guy I was real friendly with until he got in trouble with his wife, and then he started getting angry, and he started going off on this guy, and I booted him out of the game, and then he didn't want to be friends with me no more. But he was talking about me coming out by him, and he's not that far away. He's in Michigan. I'm in Wisconsin, so I kind of burned a bridge. But I thought at the time I was acting in self defense of my newly created business, which didn't end up being anything because who the hell wants to pay people to be a GM? Nobody. So that was a bad idea, but um, I don't know. Sounded like he had a temper anyway, but you never know. I keep trying. Um, yeah, I can't. I spent 8 months in North Carolina, the Barrier Islands, with my wife. Then we moved up here because things weren't going well down there between her and her family, and she needed to go. And then um, after 15 years of being isolated from her family, she started to miss them, and she invited them all up here. Well, I didn't get along with them because they were abusive to her, and so so she brings them up here without my um, consent. I start fighting with them, and she throw after 15 years she throws me to the curb and goes off with her family and leaves me. So, but I like the Barrier Islands. They were nice. I would have stayed, but her mother sold the land that we were on right out from under us. So we just had to go. And I thought, these people are crazy. They're doing crazy things to this woman. I should get her out of here for her own safety. She was what, blood's thicker than water. So, but I enjoyed it. I was in the army I was at Fort Benning for a lot of my stint in the army, and I enjoyed it down there. Nice weather, nice country, not too bad. Had some fun. The rest of it I spent in Southern California. Well, the rest of it that I had in America, I spent in Southern California, and then I went overseas too. But there was nothing fun over there. But Georgia was nice, a lot better than Southern California. Southern California, uh, the place I was at was the ass end of nowhere. It was nothing but sand and tumbleweed, and it sucked. But but Georgia was nice. I wouldn't mind going back there myself. So uh, I think it's cheaper to live down there. Woo! But maybe not by much, but it is. At least it used to be. So, yepper. Oh well. Oh yeah. Yeah, I was near Columbus. That's where Fort Benning is. Nice place. Gotta watch out for the occasional ornery wildlife, but other than that, it's okay. So, I wonder if Bill's still going. Boy, nobody wants to come on in, but that's all right. Yeah, yeah. It did seem, this was a long time ago, but it was certainly cheaper, at least back then. So it was, how was that? 2010, 2009, something like that. Yeah. We came up here and, no, it probably was even earlier than that because we came up here and, must have been 2012 or something. Anyway, it was sometime like that. I was in the service back in the 90s, early 90s. So late 80s to early 90s. I was at Fort Benning, but the Barrier Islands were neat. Uh, you could get away with damn near anything down there. Like shooting off fireworks and shit like that. There was no one around. There was 35,000 people in the entire county. Shit, there's two or three times that in the city I'm in right now. So plenty of breathing room, plenty of room to go hunting. You know, nothing bothering you. The only thing was, hey, how's it going there, Gary? Yeah, just kind of doing a long, casual chat here. Kind of a farewell, maybe. I might not be on the internet very much in the near future, unfortunately. So I'm just kind of keeping the channel open and trying to make contacts and have a conversation. Yeah. See, that's nice. I don't mind a small town. Gives you room to breathe, and they're not you don't have cops breathing down your neck for every little damn thing. If you want to if you want to buzz around your property in a four-wheeler or something like that, very few people give a shit. You try to do something like that up here where there's all these people and you know the cops are on you writing you tickets and stuff like that. So I like that sort of thing better. So it was nice that way. Um, there was drawbacks. I smoked at the time, and you had to. So we're just kind of chatting, Gary. I was talking about wargaming earlier. Then I was telling Gen Con stories. And if you got any questions about the wargaming, which was the original intent here, but we can talk about that. But in the interim, we just kind of been small talking. Um, yeah, that's why I like it. I don't you know, I don't hate cops or anything like that, but I just, you know, large towns have far too many rules and regulations to be enjoyable, and they want to give you tickets for every little damn thing. You know, noise violations. You know, suburbia. They tell you, here we want your bushes cut this way and your grass cut every week, or you get fined and all that shit. I don't, I don't want that. I want to be left alone. But yeah, we were talking about that, Gary. Let's see what else we were talking about. Well, I was telling Wolf here about some of the games that I had planned to make, some of the game design choices I had made. I've got some. I had some games I was going to sell. I was talking about a little bit about the prototype and rare items that I have from TSR. I don't know if you've ever listened to me talk before. I've told this story. People seem to enjoy it. That I had an uncle who didn't work for TSR, but he worked for a company that had TSR as an account. It was a printing and packaging company, and TSR was my uncle's account from the original inception of TSR all the way till WotC took over. He had the account. The amount of business he did varied, but in the early part he did about everything. In the 70s he did about everything. In the early 80s he did everything. Then they started finding a couple of different sources for some of their packaging and printing, and he wasn't. But he was able to give me about everything ever made from all the way up to the second edition. I told him I didn't want any more. I didn't want any more of the RPGs. I didn't like second edition. I didn't like any of that stuff. I said, can you give me some of those war games? Because they were starting to reprint some of their war games, and I wanted that stuff. So, and when Tony died, died of cancer over a period of about a year and a half, liver cancer. But just before he went, he knew I was trying to start this business. And so literally from my uncle, God love him, he was a great guy, literally from his deathbed, he says, I got something for you. I know you're starting this business. He says, remember where you went to go see my D&D stuff? I says, yeah, I went down in your basement, because that's where I discovered D&D. It was in his basement. He had samples of everything that he was printing, and I was digging through it. He sent me down there to go get a beer for him and my dad. And right next to the beer refrigerator was a table, and it had all this stuff on it that looked like, he always had something cool down there anyway. So I wanted to go see what it was. And I pulled open this tarp. I saw some colorful boxes, and I pulled open this tarp, and there was Rogue's Gallery and a bunch of piles of other books and stuff like that, chainmail and all sorts of shit. So he says, go down there and walk around the corner and go into this drawer, third drawer down, blah, blah, blah. I open it up, and there's all this stuff that's prototype samples, products that were canceled. There was artwork for products that were proposed that never made it. I have a box of a dungeon video game written for Apple IIe that never made it to market. Or well, it was. I think it made it to market in a couple of places, and then they pulled it because they didn't think it was going to be a good seller. They changed their mind. But anyway, all these canceled things and original artwork from places and stuff like that. I wanted to sell it. So a lot of people found that very interesting, I guess. So I tell that story all the time. But it was, I think he might have already gone. But yeah, there's that stuff. I think, Gary, did you leave? I think he left. That's okay. But yeah. That was some cool shit. So I always think that maybe if I tell somebody that story, they'll be like, oh, let me see it. Maybe I'll buy it, and I can sell this stuff before I get the hell out of here in the next couple of days. But that's not likely, is it? Oh, nope, he's still there. Okay. This thing lies to me. I never know who's here because it always tells me Like sometimes it'll tell me there's somebody connected and there's nobody here, and then vice versa. So I never know. But yeah, I got all that stuff, and I'm always happy to sell it because I need the money. So I don't know. I don't remember what it all is, but I do remember looking at it at one point and seeing that there was original artwork that it was signed by the artist, not a print, the actual artwork. And there's some boxes of some of these um, sets that never made. So um, if I had the time, I wish I did. Um, I was going to show it to some people who knew, like Dano and Bill, Dungeon Delver, and those guys. They might be able to recognize it and give me more information. Maybe I can still do that in the next week if anybody's interested, especially if you're interested in buying. um, but I got all sorts of that stuff. So that was my D&D thing. But if you got anything, let's see. Well, I did a 16-minute on wargaming earlier this evening and then pulled the plug on it because I saw that Dungeon Delver was opening up one at the same time I did. And I figured everybody would be going to his instead of mine as far as lives go. But I wanted to talk about those wargaming things. So I did that for a while. Um, the one for one time thing, the BROSR thing. I'm not BROSR myself. I don't use the hashtag or anything like that because a lot of people don't like those dudes. But I do like the idea, and I'm old enough to remember playing those that way, and it's a lot of fun to play that way. And I think that a lot of the arguments around it are because people don't understand it properly. So that was one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today, simultaneity and stuff like that. But I also just decided I'm just leaving the stream open today all night because um, I might be on skid row in the next week, and I just wanted to talk to as many people as I could in the next couple of days while I have a chance to. So tomorrow afternoon I'll be working on moving. I think the next day I might not be, so I might open up the stream and hang out all day, and then on the weekend I'll be moving again. So, anything you got to say, or any questions or comments, folks? I always like to have a back and forth. I hate to be too much of a chatty Cathy. I like to, have people bounce ideas and stuff like that off of me and make it a two-way thing. So, anybody? Anything? Can tell you about what I was making. Of course, that'll bore you. Well, okay. Some of the stuff I don't even know what to ask for because I don't have any idea. I did look up. I have as far as the artwork stuff. I would imagine based on what I've seen, it would be at least four figures. As far as the packaging stuff, uh, not that much, but um, I'd like to see what exactly it is so that when people like yourself go, well, what are you talking about? I can give you more detail. Um, I only looked at it a couple of times, and the reason I only looked at it a couple of times, I was afraid to take it out and get it damaged or something like that if I bent it the wrong way or something. But I do recollect that there was some original artwork. Like I say, that would probably be the stuff that's worth the most. The rest are folded uh, boxes of D&D products that never made it to market. I don't remember the details on what the product was supposed to be, with the exception of and Tony didn't know because he wasn't a gamer. So I mean, he was just a business guy that worked with these gamer guys, and he'd always give me the stuff. But he did know about the dungeon game. In the dungeon game, I have a couple of those boxes. I used to have three, but I think one got damaged, unfortunately. The one I have handy is the full set. It's a Apple IIe, the old Apple II computers, 5 1/4 disc, with the game, the board game Dungeon. It's a computer version of the board game Dungeon. And it's the actual product. And I would want several $100s for that. What happened with that is they made it and they were going to sell it in KB Hobbies in the late 70s, early 80s, probably the late 70s. I remember looking at the copyright. And they put it out in some markets. I've heard some people say that they actually bought it off the shelf, but they pulled it from the shelf because they came to the conclusion that it was a $65 item in 1979, which was way too much money for the demographic that they were aiming it at. They were looking at 12 to 14-year-old boys in 1979. Who's going to have $65 to drop on a game? Because $65 meant a lot more in 1979 than it did, than it does now. So they stopped and they pulled it. So the other two boxes did not have the software and it just had everything else. And so I would, less, but it's pretty rare. Although I've had people claim that they have a copy, but I didn't see them prove that they did. So according to Tony, nobody did, but whatever. So I've got that. I have some other more modern things that I saw were going for some big money. I had one guy interested. I've got a gargantuan red dragon still in the box. The box has never been opened. The box is not mint, but it's not destroyed either. And I've never pulled it out. It's one of those miniatures, but it's the super big one. And I've seen those go for $200, $300, if not more. So, and then I've got a smaller giant black dragon. I've got I don't think anybody wants this. I thought maybe collectors might, but I have a second edition fighters kit. They made these for fighters and thieves, if I recall correctly. And this one's still wrapped in a plastic, never been opened, if I remember right. And it came with a manual just for the fighter class and some other material for the fighter, but it's second edition. And I don't even know what that's going. I just thought I'd put it out for auction or something like that, or give me an offer and I'd go on eBay and see if other people sold it for approximately the same and just take it for that. I don't want to be too picky on some of this stuff. I just want to get rid of it. So I have some copies of Dragon Dice that I've never opened. I have a couple of copies of the actual Dungeon board game from the 70s, the original one. I have some copies of TSR attempted to capitalize on the cartoon. If you remember the cartoon, the D&D cartoon, they came out with some products for younger children called Fantasy Forest. I have 2 or 3 copies of that. I have a mint in the box, unwrapped 4 or 5 volumes of young readers D&D stuff for kids. They're yellow. I think there's 4 or 5 of them. I don't know if they're choose your own adventure, but I believe they were intended to try to be intros for younger players or younger children. Bunch of stuff like that. So yeah, and I can, the stuff that's the here, I'll show you. Give me 1 second. I think it's right over there. Let me show it to you. Well, I spoke too soon. It looks like my buddy already packed it away, but it's a black. If you're familiar with them, if not, it's a black plastic hardcover case. It's got a label with the second edition fighter. I forget the name of that artwork, but it's a fighter with the slash, and he's got the palm, um, and then it's got fighter tables and stuff inside of it, things like that. But it looks like I already got it packed away, but I do have it, and I can get at it if you want to buy it. I can mail it for you or something like that. So, um, but yeah, it's like a tackle box with stuff inside of it. In fact, I can put it on my Twitter. Put a picture, second edition fighter kit. Put it on my image of it on my Twitter. You know, search engines aren't as I think that they'd be getting better, but I swear they're getting worse. I swear they're getting worse. Oh, here's a picture. Okay, I have a picture of it. Good. All right. So I'll put that on my here, I'll tag you for it. If I could spell or type. There we go. I tag you for sale. Then you can see it. Fighters Player Pack. That's what it's called. Yeah. So I got a bunch of stuff like that. What else? I think that's about it for D&D. The two dragons. The like I say, the really rare stuff is all that cardboard printing that I got from, and the artwork that I got from my uncle, and the video game and stuff like that. So I have, if you are you anybody into Arkham Horror, I have Arkham Horror miniatures, and a lot of them were promotional miniatures that were only given to retailers. I got a ton of that stuff. A box about 5 inches by 2 inches and about 3 or 4 inches deep, just filled with Arkham Horror. I've got some D&D miniatures. This stuff is so old. I've been literally carrying around some of this stuff for 20, 30 years. Yeah. Some of them, I've got some D&D promotional stuff. All the stuff I have, almost all the stuff I have in the realm of Arkham Horror were promotional kits given to retailers that were, so I got a bunch of them from WotC. I've got, some other stuff I have is Star Wars WotC miniatures. I don't know if anybody gives a shit about that stuff anymore. But I have a bunch of it. A lot of it is unopened. And in fact, I have an entire case that's still in the cardboard shipping that's never been opened. And I don't know why I didn't sell that at the time when that shit was hot, because I probably could have got hundreds for that case, unopened case, but I've still got the unopened case that I never cracked open. So I got a bunch of that stuff. Some D&D miniatures as well. Some opened, most of them, I think there's even some that are still unopened. What other Star Wars stuff I have? I have a bunch of Star Wars miniatures, all WotC stuff, miniature box set. I don't know if anybody, I think I've seen that stuff go pretty cheap. I don't think most people give a turkey about that stuff, but I got a lot of it. I mean, I kept it. I bought it because I thought I could, sell it on eBay, and then that never worked out. And then I kept it thinking I would use it for tabletop games. And then I moved into an apartment where it didn't matter anymore and stuff like that. So, That's, yeah, some of this stuff. I see on see some of it. You never know, but anyway, I can get rid of some of that too. Um, yeah, yeah, boxes and boxes of that stuff. Oh yeah, if you're a Star Wars toy collector, I have a Millennium Falcon that's in the box. Unfortunately, my psychotic mother-in-law did a little bit of damage to the box, but it's never been removed. It's the white box with the blue lettering. It was um, released probably about 20 years ago. I've still got that. I've got TIE fighters in, they're not Kenner, they're not from the 80s, but they're uh, from the late 90s or early 2000s. I've got four of those TIE fighters, or Kenner size ones. I got stuff like that that I was hoping to sell. Um, you know that, but I don't even know. I bought the stuff thinking that it would be collector's items, and I don't know where they're at with it now. At one point, I saw them going for quite a bit, but I didn't. I don't know. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. I don't know where they're at. For a while I did, but it'd just be better to turn them into cash than to have to carry them. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just gonna say, I think 2010 would be about the right era. Really even sure. So here I see a Hasbro. Yeah, not much, but something. Something's better than nothing. So, uh, about as much as I probably paid for them, but it's at least it's money in my pocket. So, uh, but just get rid of that kind of stuff if I could. But yeah, that's the kind of things I'm trying to get rid of. I've got a bunch of gaming stuff. A lot of it I'd end up having to. I'm going to end up carrying with me, putting in storage, and hopefully I'll have an opportunity to liquidate it to pay for some things later on. But I know I do have a lot of that Arkham Horror stuff ready to be sold and things like that. So, yep. Probably it's about all I can think of. The rest of the stuff that I have for sale is kind of World War II stuff. I got some 132nd World War II material for sale, some 172nd, things like that that I could probably sell at some point. So what the hell am I? Things like that. Oh, anyway, getting a little hot. I think I'm going to go get myself something to drink. I'm going to put a pause on this. Maybe I'll start up late night, see if anybody else bites. But I had to make a phone call. So, hey, thanks for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. I've been kind of down in the slumps, and it was nice to have a conversation with somebody. But I'm going to try to make this phone call and get a little something to eat. Maybe come back a little later. Yeah. Same with you, man. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon. All righty. Have a good one.